Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Shirts Chat. I'm Monica Burton.
I'm Annette Ryder, and we have Dr. Harold Shinitzky with us back again. Thank you, Harold, for joining us.
Always a pleasure to be with y'all.
Yes, we love having you on our show.
Same here. And hopefully your listening audience also appreciates it too.
Yes, of course they do. Plus, we want to talk about, you can't have the author of The Champion Mindset here and not talk about like football season and what it does with families and our fandom and fantasy football and how it affects us. And
the whole world of sports.
It's a nice way to start with the idea of fan because it is short for fanatic.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's right. It is, it's become like you've got to like drink the beverage before they get to, or eat the hot dog before they get to second, and all the rules of all the superstitions and to get them to win, right?
It is amazing. I have a subchapter, as we were talking about it in my book, specifically on the superstitions displayed by athletes. And you see this constantly where there was an athlete at one point, it was called touch me, touch you. He had to, if someone touched him, he had to touch them back. And so people would actually come up to him for fun, touch him, and then run away. Carrie Walsh, one of the greatest volleyball players of all time, before every play, whether she was on the serving team or the returning team, she would dig her foot under the sand and flip it up. One of the most prolific tennis players of all time, Rafa Nadal, he's got about like 10 of these kind of superstitions that got the water and the electrolytes, and it's got to be a certain direction. And I never step on a line when I go out there, and I have to kind of move my hair in a certain way, clear my nose, grab my crotch. He does these same ritualistic kind of superstition behaviors. The great thing for him, he's fantastic. Most people who make these associations in the general public, before we started today, was the idea that the law of association. We make up these beliefs that if something happened and there was something that occurred, a desired outcome happened at a similar time as something that had occurred, we put them together, we associate them. So, people have phobias that exact same way.
Right.
So they get affixed to this idea of the rally cap in baseball.
Right.
My team's down, flip the baseball cap inside out and a jaunty turtle to it. And they came back. Oh, now I'm going to do that.
Right. I'm going to keep doing the rally cap. I was explaining to you, like one time my husband's baseball team that he roots for scored while I was unloading the dishwasher. And so I was like, oh, darn, now I always have to unload the dishwasher. And for a while there, if they didn't, score every time I get a home run every time I was unloading the dishwasher. I'm like, oh, when is the streak going to end so I don't have to do this? But
like, I'm tired of doing the dishes.
Your husband, he's calling up the team and he's saying, all right, she's at the dishwasher. Now bring your A game now. That's exactly what's happening, everybody.
That's the kind of influence we have from our living room kitchen area on professional athletes.
It took me a long time after I graduated from my undergrad. It really took me a long time to get the secure belief that me watching the game on Saturday didn't have an influence on the game. I remember when I finally got to the point where I could liberate myself from watching because my watching didn't have a bearing on it. That was a very liberating experience. And there are many people around the world who they have this magical belief that their mojo being put out into the universe is affecting, their players in such a way that they're able to outperform the other team, who apparently either don't have fans who have as much mojo, or, like I have athletes who tell me, they give it faith-based. And I always want to take a look at like the losing locker room and have them say, well, apparently whoever my supreme being that I pray to apparently has forsaken us. Like maybe we're not worthy. We're not praying enough. It's interesting when you start hearing this. You're like, wait, that doesn't seem to make sense.
Right.
But yeah, we have people who are they spend the majority of their time on the weekends fixed into watching sports, and that has some pretty adverse effects on some of their relationships.
Absolutely. So what are some tools that, you know, if you had a client come to you and said like, hey, I want to learn how to kind of I want to enjoy watching sports, but I want to kind of disconnect from this association. What are some good techniques that you can kind of give us?
Well, when you're talking about withdrawing from anything,
Yeah, right.
A lot of people will say, do you go cold turkey?
Right.
Or do you decrease it incrementally, titrating it down?
Right.
There are some people who can go cold turkey, and that's fine. And, you know, more
Sure.
power to them. But most people actually have to kind of decrease their exposure. So when you look at that, I always want to know what's the reason, what are the benefits someone's getting from it, and then what are the consequences. So if I hear that the person is doing it because they themselves want to be able to just kind of do something different, you know, like I'm realizing it's taking too much of my time and I've got maybe work responsibilities and I need to do that. Pardon me. At that point, now we're starting to talk some really good therapy stuff, because now we're talking insight oriented change versus consequence driven change.
Right.
Consequence driven change is always short lived. I'm doing it because I was given an ultimatum. And so once I finally get past that ultimatum, I'll likely slip back into my old behavior. Or if, let's just say, the ultimatum kicks in, now it's like, screw it. Oh, no. Now I'm just going to do it all, because I'm doing it to manipulate someone.
Right. Yeah.
Insight oriented change has someone who has a personal desire because they want to change their behavior. So they actually can develop the skills where you have a decrease in exposure. And then there's the urgency to return. And as we always say, you can have any thought or feeling, but you ultimately control your behavior. So you can have that urgency, but it doesn't necessarily mean you must do it. There's a concern that bad things will happen, and that goes to the law of association. Well, if I'm not watching, okay, well then who do you want to watch? And then you could say, well, wait a second. Instead of watching all day long, 1 o'clock game, 4 o'clock game, 7 o'clock game,
Right.
how do we take it to your preferred team?
Right.
Which is a bit old school because there's fantasy football now.
Right.
And so if you are a fan of a team, can you watch that game and then move on in your life? Which I think for the traditional sports fan, that's a reasonable discussion.
Right.
If it's like your spouse is saying, can we do something in addition to this game? I mean, there's all day. Can one game maybe?
Right.
You know, now you're talking about the quality of the relationship and, you know, what's the messaging you're sending to your loved one. Fantasy football is a different beast.
Right. That's bigger.
You're no longer a fan of a team. You're a fan of all the players on your team, and they could be playing throughout the day. So now you have someone who literally is now turning towards kind of the addiction. I am now drawn to all of this throughout the day. And it's no longer a traditional value. It's now an economic reality that I have to be paying attention, as though somehow, like, I'm the general manager of this team.
Right. It's like the Dungeons and Dragons of football.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Rolling the die, but the die is the odds and the stats that your player just did on that game. So now you can apply that to how it would have gone in your fantasy game. And did you win or not win? And, you know, and it gets very compulsive. I've had regularly, I'm sure you have too, maybe all of you have, Monica, but I was just thinking with more, since Monica and I do a lot of couples work, I've had it where we've got to get rid of fantasy football for the next year because it's really becoming so compulsive, taking over their lives. They're not able to, they're not there or present with their kids. They're at the soccer field watching their kid play soccer, but you know, they got earbuds in and they're listening to games and taking notes on their you know, their fantasy, their made up football team that they own.
I also think it's interesting because we go from like enjoyment and fun to like almost this like obsessiveness, and we take it personal. You know, I think that it's like because I'm even thinking about like my own relationship with football. Like I've always loved football. I went away from it for a little while when I was going through some stuff in my own life. And then now my son, my older son, is playing like high school football and he's pretty good at it. And now I'm like finding myself, oh, I really enjoy this. Where it's
Mhm.
like, so to make a long story short, it's like, but that's fun. That's
Mhm.
enjoyable. And I also think it can kind of translate into just even as parents, and I try really hard not to, say anything to Andrew about like, about pressure and you got to do this because you're going to go to play in college or maybe you're going to play in the NFL. Like I definitely don't do that. But I
Right.
think it's almost the same thing of like, even as like these little peewee football players whose parents are saying, you got to go to the NFL. Like they're 7 years old.
Yeah.
When can it just be this enjoyable thing?
I did an article years ago. It was titled it was for tennis players, and they were being trained by this very militant former military drill sergeant who's now a tennis coach and was just barking at them constantly. And they were just little weeblos. And the reality at their age, it was really well, you might hear people say it's eye-hand coordination. In tennis, it's actually eye-racket coordination.
Right.
And I wrote the title of the article was The Fundamentals of Tennis. And it was capital F, capital U, capital N.
Absolutely.
It was the fundamentals. I mean, these children were just working on motor coordination, neurological development, and have fun. So the idea that for those little kiddos, the coaches are supposed to make it fun when you're teaching the basic skills. So let's just use tennis, for example. As a child swings for making contact for the ball, they're supposed to actually giggle.
Mm.
Doesn't matter whether they get the ball in or not. They're going to lose every match of their life as a 4-year-old, and then
Right.
they're going to magically win it because they hit the ball.
Right.
It doesn't matter at this point. Skill development is a form. It's a motor coordination. It makes it automaticity. You start developing brain to muscle kind of predictable movement, and that's what you're supposed to be teaching at that young age. Nothing more than that. Parents who kind of freak out at that early point that talks about how, well, their child's going to be this exceptional one.
Right.
Moms and dads, I'm glad you love your child, and I want you to give them the very best that you can. Their ability to make it as a pro, the odds are pretty small. And so physically, they're going to have to be able to be advanced. A lot of young adults do very well at a very young age because they're giving opportunities. But once they start getting into adolescence, that's when we start seeing the difference between those who are the elite athletes and everybody else. Just want to put it in perspective. College athletes, 1 in 100 goes pro. 1 in 100 goes pro. High school, it's the tens of thousands that end up, that 1 in tens of thousands go pro. And as your child is a little weeblo, let's have fun. You want to be your child's parent, which means being there for them, loving them, supporting them. It is not wins and losses. That is a distraction. And that's usually the parent living vicariously through the child.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, one of those things where if, their coaches, like at least at the high school phase, what I'm noticing, their coaches are doing it for you. You just need to show up and be their parent,
Right. Yeah,
Right. That's for all athletics. I actually have a chapter specifically on being a parent of an elite athlete. And I say there are 3 jobs for a parent of an elite athlete. Love and positive regard, supporting them, transportation, and write a check.
Yeah.
That's it. Don't be re-coaching your child. If you re-coach your child and you say, well, your coach is wrong. Well, first off, you're teaching your child to be uncoachable. You're teaching your child to don't have trust and confidence in your coach. You're teaching your child question everything. You're teaching your child, I know better than your coach.
Right.
Those are horrible lessons. If you don't like your child's coach, go to a different team, get it with a different coach. But don't be re-coaching your child. And then there's too many parents, not too many, I should say. There are some parents who do coach their children, and they do a great job. And there are some parents who coach their children, and they're actually part of the issue.
Mhm.
And they don't quite get it. And again, it's oftentimes living vicariously. And I always like to look at it as whose goal is it? Whose agenda? What's your why? And there's a lot of kids who they just don't want to disappoint their parents.
Right.
I've had so many young adults who finally got to a point where they had to set a boundary on their own parent. And I had a young lad who was brought in by his family. He was a baseball player, and they just said he gets so nervous when he's up there to bat. You can see him actually kind of leaning away as the pitch comes in. And then I turned to the young lad and I said, is this kind of the case? And he said, yeah, I look into the crowd and my dad is screaming. And I go, screaming? I mean, there's a difference between, shout, yell, scream. He goes, yeah. He goes, as a matter of fact, my dad has been thrown out of 3 baseball games as a fan.
Oh, wow.
Oh my goodness.
At which point I turned to the dad. I go, is this the case? It's like, you're telling me your son is emotionally overreacting? You're telling me.
Right.
Yeah, so sometimes parents, it's an unintended consequence. They love their child. They want the best for the child, but they may not understand what worked for them maybe doesn't necessarily even apply to their child.
Absolutely.
And to help them understand, that's where sometimes a parent doesn't make for the best coach.
Yeah, even if they're a coach. I mean, I've had lots of friends that are coaches, and they really find they can't coach their own kid, even though they are coaches, right? Or trainers. They do this, and other people pay them. This is their profession, but their own kid has to go to a different trainer or a different coach to learn that athleticism, because it's hard to keep the role of parent and coach separate in I mean, obviously we have some huge successes, but we also have some obvious cutoffs out there. Like, I mean, Tiger Woods is one I'm thinking of. His dad was there at the beginning quite, all the time. And then his dad wasn't there. Moved the relationship in a different direction. It happens.
Right.
There are great coaches. I mean, great parents who can be great coaches. There are some that unfortunately need some assistance and some limits. And it's a difficult conversation. I tend to say to all the athletes that I work with, especially the young adults, that the most fun part of my job is when I get to challenge their parents. Oh yeah, they're not interested in that. It's like, well, there are certain things we can do to help your child. Literally, I was talking to somebody about they're anxious before performance. And we discussed that whole idea. I was, what do you mean? I go, well, they're really like big, important tournaments. And I said, well, what do you mean they're big and important tournaments? At which point the dad who's sitting right behind this athlete was like, well, there's coaches there from college, and this is like, we're getting late in years, and they're going to miss their opportunity. And as our conversation went on, I said, I'm going to say something that's probably going to be a little difficult to handle. And that is, you're right here, right now. This is your skill level. This is where you're at, competing at. And this is where you want to be. And I always like to ask them, are you being paid? I go, no. I go, okay, you're an amateur. Then everything between here and here is practice. It's just practice to get better.
Right.
Let's not get distracted by what you call these things. There are 3 things that do not matter. 3 things that do not matter. And I want all my athletes to get this. Moms, dad.
Yeah.
Take notes.
I'm listening.
Right. 3 things that do not matter. The name of the event, the number of people watching or who's in the crowd, and the potential trophy or points you can earn at the end. The name of the event doesn't matter. Just because you call it something important.
The World Championships.
Yes.
Right.
For Seminole Lake, Largo, McMullen, like those are distractions. Those titles are distractions. The laws of physics still do exactly what they do. They don't change. So a lot of people who go from practice just to competition find that their performance decreases, and that's by virtue of their labeling. This is something that's important. Now I physiologically react because I have a perception about it. So one of the things I try to help them understand is like, oh, it's the biggest golf tournament of my life. Was the course twice as big? Are they using larger balls? Do you have to use someone else's clubs?
Right.
It's the exact same skill set. Laws of physics that you've been doing everywhere and anywhere. The most elite athletes in the world understand that all of that pomp and circumstance is a distraction. I just bring it to the singular play, this movement, this moment in time.
Right.
And you don't get consumed. And too many people are like, this is big. This is a showcase tournament. There are coaches watching. Okay, well, the first thing that doesn't matter is the name of the event. I mean, I call it Hippos Fly South for the Winter Tournament.
Right.
Call it whatever you want. It's just, that's a label, and we don't want to freak people out with that. The number of people watching or who's in the crowd. Well, you start with a couple of people in the crowd, and usually parents. And then you start playing a little longer. Now there's more people. Ooh, well, if you use that same logic, well, if I'm in the Super Bowl, I should roll into a little ball and pee myself because, you know, it's this massive event. But how do the elite athletes handle it? Well, nothing matters outside of the lines of the field.
Right.
The fans don't exist. I learned to filter them out. Like right now, I have a giant plate glass window in front of me that looks out to beautiful downtown St. Petersburg here.
Right.
But I'm not sitting here kind of, I'm sorry, what'd you say? Hold it. What was that?
Yeah.
I filter this out because I have the capability neurologically to do that. And we teach our athletes how to filter. And a lot of parents would say, my gosh, if I was in that situation, I'd freak out. Like, yes, you would. But your child has learned to filter it out. Plus, if I focus externally, like, oh, there's coaches up there, two things happen. I'm not focusing on my skills internally. And now I'm putting pressure on myself because I'm now focusing on other people judging me, which I have no control over. So the first thing that doesn't matter is the name of the event. The second thing that doesn't matter is the number of fans or who's in the crowd. And the third thing that doesn't matter is the trophy that you can win or the points you can earn. Because those are outcomes. Performance is already over. There is literally nothing you can do to change the outcome now that you're at the outcome.
Right.
So if I start focusing on the outcome, like, man, if I win this tournament, I can get these many UTR points. Well, if I'm focusing on the outcome, I'm not focusing on the skill, and I'm putting too much pressure on. So I literally said this to the family last night. You know, we really, if you're an amateur and you're here and you want to get here, all amateurs have two goals: improve my skills, decrease my errors. That's it.
Right.
I spend my entire amateur time improving my skills and decreasing my errors. I increase my probability of reaching to the next level. If I focus in on being in the moment and being, let's say, ready for the pitch, swinging smoothly through, keeping my eye on the ball, allowing myself to be relaxed, I'll increase my performance.
Right. And it's such a beautiful analogy for life.
Absolutely.
How we handle regular life. Like, I think of, you know, improving your skill sets and decreasing your errors is almost like a communication technique I'm teaching couples all day long, or how to, like, you know, we're just trying to, you know, not attack, blame, criticize, defend, or demand too much here. So that's improving your skill sets, and that's decreasing errors. And you'll start to have a more relatable, connecting conversation with your partner, and you may actually get somewhere that doesn't hurt, you know, that doesn't hurt.
Right. And I was also thinking, as I know we were talking about like parent-child being in sports, but I was also thinking that, like, relating that back to what we were talking about prior, this obsessiveness. You know, we get so obsessed with sports and even fantasy football, like applying some of these, you know, letting go of the distractions and the outcomes of things and getting back to fun, like having fun with sports, you know.
If you look at what our conversation has been and apply it to life, you can actually see how it transitions to that. I always like to point out to individuals that there are no guarantees. Obviously, if we're talking to adults, we can always say, what are the two guarantees? And everyone would say death and taxes. And if you're a 15-year-old, I'll say you'll get it in 10 years.
Yeah.
But other than that, there are no guarantees. Study your hardest. It doesn't guarantee you get an A on the test. Work your hardest at practice. Doesn't guarantee you're a starter. There are no guarantees. And in light of having that knowledge, it's important to realize, well, then what am I doing? Well, the goal then is to increase my probability of success. That's it. That's it in everything of your life.
Absolutely. I love that.
Increase my probability of success. Now, there are people who are selfish and narcissistic, pardon me, who will increase their probability of failure. I'll cheat on a relationship. I'll speed when I drive.
Right.
Things that put them at risk. I'll show up late to work because I think I'm special. In that case, then you're increasing your probability of failure. I'm always encouraging the individuals I work with, increase your probability of success. So like if you want to get good grades, okay, well, what can you do? I can go to class, attend, do my homework, participate, learn that there's a difference between homework and studying, maybe get a tutor, go to a study group, maybe find a study buddy. All these things, though, actually, none of these things guarantee a high grade, but they all increase my probability of success.
Right.
And so what can I do in a relationship?
Right.
Well, there are no guarantees.
No, there are no guarantees. In fact, there's necessary risk in a relationship. Necessary risk. In fact, you must live in the necessary risk to get what you want.
Oh, that's anything in general. Absolutely.
Right. These are all lessons for all of life. And sometimes, the success you're getting from studying and working hard and dedicating yourself to something isn't the great grade, but it's the great practice, right? It's the great practice that now you can apply to something else and something else. And this wins the long game. That's what I feel like telling people, right? It's the long game of life that you're really playing. Like maybe your kids, I don't know, high school football career won't get them a college football career, but it will get them discipline, and discipline wins all the time. But it doesn't always win the short game or the small focus. It wins the big picture.
You're hitting the nail on the head. There was a research study a long time ago that wanted to find out what was the highest correlated factor for overall long-term success. And they defined success in many different ways, obviously. But they thought it was going to be intelligence. Now, intelligence is a high correlated factor, but it wasn't the highest. The highest one was diligence. Was that, persistence, steadfastness. I set a goal, I work towards it so I can achieve it. I may not make an Olympic roster, but I've learned that I can apply myself, that I can be successful, that I can be a good teammate, that I can communicate well, take responsibilities, execute, follow through on what I commit. By the way, those very skills that work in team sports are laterally transferable to exceptional business people. The ability to communicate verbally, the ability written format where you got the plays written out. How do I communicate the tasks? The ability to cooperate, to understand, to delegate, all of these factors. How do I fight through the difficult times? You might be trying to sell a product and it may not necessarily be doing the best for a couple of times. Well, what do I learn from that? We talk about, I always like to talk about, you want to have a pre-game routine. So you go in, you need to study about the company you're going to be talking to. You need to understand, what is your loved one interested in? Listen for the keys to the kingdom when they say, I like irises instead of roses. Okay, note to self, irises, not roses.
Please note to self.
And then you go into these opportunities. Remember, no guarantee. So I increase my probability of success. And as you're saying, it's the long haul. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So what can I do that propels me down this path towards success to reach my pinnacle? It's not just these momentary aspects. I tell everybody, your self-confidence should not be situationally dependent. I crushed the sales. I'm the best salesperson on the planet. I lost this account. I should quit. No, your self-confidence really should be based on what your average is. So if I have a grade point average, let's just say I'm a 3.2 grade point average out of a 4. Well, that means the highest I can get, maybe I was getting an A in some class, so it's a 4. but my GPA is a 3.2. And maybe I got a C on something that was, not so great.
Right.
And every permutation in there. And my GPA is probably the best example of truly who I am as a student. So today, if I do really well, I don't walk around and just brag that I'm the best student, but I can learn from this. And when I go in and there's a quiz and I didn't realize it and I do poorly, I don't suddenly think I'm a terrible student and I should just drop out of school, but I can learn from it. So I always say my self-confidence should be equal to my average, exclamation mark, and is it improving?
Right.
So I can actually bring up my lower score. And when I bring up my lower score, my average increases. My cluster gets more tight. I become more predictable and consistent.
Right.
It's great to see people apply this in life.
Right.
Yep.
Well, you're kind of talking a little bit about like Duckworth's research on grit. She was the psychologist who went out to, got hired by West Point to figure out why, when they thoroughly vet all of these, cadets or candidates to come to West Point, why they still were having a third drop off.
Right.
I mean, these are all, like Eagle Scouts and top athletes and, straight A students, like their credentials, all of them are off the chart, but yet they don't stick with it. And what she found was this characteristics that she took from the John Wayne movie Grit.
Yep.
And talked about grittiness, which is, you called it diligence, she would call it perseverance of task, right? Like that you not only are bright and good and talented, but you stick with stuff, which means you do just what you were saying. You pay attention to the average as your happy zone and go, wow, good job. 3.2, just moved it to 3.25 rather than, oh yeah, excellent job because of the A, right? Like you said, you don't jump onto the cloud when it's the high, and you don't jump onto the cloud when it's the low. You jump onto the middle cloud and you hang tight.
Yeah, you don't ride your highest highs and you don't ride your lowest lows. That capacity to learn. So like we were saying, you should have a pre-game routine, a pre-shot routine, a pre-date routine. That's great. I also think it's important. The research shows that the difference between the best players, literally the best players, and the other exceptional players, not us.
Yeah.
There's a lot of difference between us and the top players, but the difference between the top players and the others are what happens shortly after what takes place. In tennis, it's the 10 seconds after a point ends. And so I teach what's called the post-shot routine. So after a point ends, in life, whatever it may be, something works out well, again, in sales or in a relationship.
Right.
I can feel good. And if I feel good, it feels positive. You gotta like that. But I'm not learning from my emotion. What was it that I did to help this outcome? And if something doesn't work out, I might feel really bad. And we all react, we're human. But I'm not learning from it. The problem is the positive emotion that I'm not learning from, how do I repeat it? I need to ask myself, like this post-shot routine. The worst part is the negative emotion.
Right.
If I'm not learning from it, I dwell on it, I linger on it, I may beat myself up, I can become harsh and brutal and abusive to myself. I'm not learning anything other than eviscerating myself, my own psyche and well-being. So the post-shot routine goes from emotion to cognition, from feelings to thought, from my limbic region of the brain to my higher cortical functioning. And I ask myself 3 questions. What was the plan? What actually happened?
Yeah.
And what do I learn from this?
Right.
Now I'm shifting to higher cortical functioning. It's like if you had someone who was your own private coach walking with you, who just kind of said, okay, I get it, you're upset. All right, but let's get the emotions out. Let's just kind of take a look. What was the plan when you were doing this? Well, I wanted to ask that person out. Oh,
right.
And what ended up happening? They said, no, thank you. I'm in a relationship.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And what do you learn from that? Well, not all the time will I ask and someone say yes, and this person is faithful, and that's a nice thing to see that exists in relationships. And
Great.
right, and I don't have to personalize it.
Right.
Where too many other people, then they don't learn from it, they abuse themselves, they don't, they start personalizing it. And when they start abusing themselves, especially when I hear people talk about having low self-worth, even if their parents will say, well, like I shower them with praise, I always ask the person, would you date your negative self-talk?
Yeah.
And more times than not, people are like, well,
Yeah.
it's like, right, we need to have a little grace for
Right.
ourselves. And if we can go from those just raw emotions and learn from it. Every athlete I work with, if after every point you actually got better, either I achieve my goal or it's a learning opportunity.
Right.
What a magnificent mindset to have.
Right. What if you reversed it even? Like, what if you took the negative mindset to the positive goal, like great shot, and just go, whatever. And then you
People do that.
Right. And then they took the positive aspect to the negative, like that they blow it. Oh, okay. I could have done this. I could have done that. Okay. I see where I could do this differently. Right. But you have to get a little bit calmer with your negative, and then also not attach too much to, right, like the positive, like, which is bringing the and reversing it. And I remember thinking this when I was in college, undergraduate, so 20 something, like, oh, I need to like actually show up positive about what I perceive as the negative things in my life, and maybe a little negative about what I think of as the positive things. So I don't over focus on the wrong egocentric things that don't get you anywhere. I mean, it's good to be good at things, but you don't always have to like lean into that. Just like learn and be happier with, like, oh, here's the learning curve for myself.
We actually make great strides in life when we learn from our errors, our mistakes, our losses, our failures. If I do what I do and I just do what I do, I'll probably just keep doing what I'm doing. But it's the capacity of experiencing a loss, a failure, to learn from it. How can I improve from that?
Right.
Every time I do that, my arsenal becomes bigger, my repertoire becomes broader, my skill set becomes more masterful. And so that's really what we're looking at. And so it's great. I'm grateful to be able to share this with you all and with your listeners. This is fun.
Well, I think then that's how we learn, right? Is when we're willing to learn from our failures or our mistakes, but without that negative voice beating us down.
And if we just take it with the post-shot routine, where it's just simply a reflection of, well, what was my plan? What actually happened? And what do I learn from this? That is a goal that I hope everyone can take from today.
And I think people can take that to their family. Like, what's my goal here? Like, yeah, I like football. Like, I like watching games, but too, is this good for me and my family that I watch football on Sunday and then Thursday, and then I got to go to high school game, and then I got to watch something at a college on Saturday? Like, how is that going to be if I take 20 hours a week for watching my football games?
Yeah. What's the message I'm sending? Because you want to keep it in perspective. And a lot of people create an excessive value to it. And so we have to learn that, your family, your relationship, are you investing an equal, better, more special amount of time sending messages to each member of the family, rather than just saying selfishly, this is all I'm going to do, and you become secondary.
Right. Right.
Yes. Well, here it is, our football, families, fantasy, and fun. How do you do all the F words without the bad F word?
Yeah, right. Well, I love talking about this topic with you, Harold. So I'm really appreciative that you're here today. Learn some things for myself too.
Me too.
It's always a pleasure to meet with you all and share this information. It was fun because I didn't know what direction we were going to go on this, and this really kind of took a fun one.
Yeah, it did take a fun one. Speaking of the F word, we want to keep it fun and light, right? And to those, like all of our listeners, I highly recommend Harold's book, A Champion Mindset. It's a great one for sports and really for life.
Thank
you. Thanks, Harold, for coming back.
Yep.
And, please let us know about how you're decreasing errors in your life, how you're using some of these great sports analogies for your own living of your life, and maybe even a few fantasy football strugglers out there.
Yes. All right, guys, we appreciate you listening.
I know.
Thank you.